Morning, citizens. Um, I thought I'd just um, say a few words about the Conservative Party leadership results, and just to sort of declare, some kind of minor interest in it, really, because it really isn't all that important any longer. But um, so the black Nigerian woman Kemi Badenoch has triumphed over the white Englishman Robert Jenrick. Now, we'll leave my opinions out of this for a moment, but in the last leadership contest, um, when Liz Truss got in, I wanted Badenoch to win. I thought she was saying all the right things. She seemed to be genuinely conservative. Um, and at that point in time, I thought if she won, that would actually be quite a good thing. And I thought she was um, solid enough and intelligent enough and had the right values to be a Conservative Party leader. Um, and what was that? 2 years ago now, and a lot has changed in 2 years. And at the time, I thought that it was, I thought it would have been refreshing at the time, um, to have somebody genuinely different running the Conservative Party, and of course she would have become prime minister, of course, at the time. And I wasn't phased by that at all, unlike many people. And like I say, a lot has changed in 2 years. And I think now that that moment of having a black woman as Prime Minister of the United Kingdom has passed. Now, a lot of people are saying that she is just a pathetic diversity hire and it's just virtue signalling on part of the Conservative Party. And, I'm sure, some of that is true. And certainly the Conservative Party are no uh, the morality of the Conservative Party is something that was buried very many years ago. Um, and of course, there is this fetishization of ethnic minorities, to in positions of traditional power, which is which is obviously a way of deflecting accusations of racism at the British establishment. Um, we got we got Liz Truss last time, but they didn't want Liz Truss, whoever they is, the people behind the scenes, the because the Conservative Party membership was set to Badenoch was their favourite at the time, and because of the shenanigans and support that goes on behind the scenes, and I suppose what happened was that they decided that I think they probably decided that Badenoch was too much of a challenge to their man Rishi Sunak. So they put her up against Liz Truss, who was far more of a lightweight. Not that Rishi Sunak was any kind of a heavyweight, but he had the backing of the the blob, I suppose. So they edged Badenoch out in favour of Truss, thinking Truss would lose to Rishi Sunak, and of course she didn't. And so they were faced with the dilemma. They hadn't got their man in. So, she comes in, and I think it's fairly obvious that there was a plot by the establishment to get rid of her so they could get their man in, the ex-Goldman Sachs banker, Rishi Sunak. Perhaps the conspiracy goes deeper in that they knew that Sunak was a lightweight and that he would lose to Keir Starmer when the election came round. All this, 4 and 5D chess that we're told goes on about behind the scenes that we can't see. So maybe it does go as deep as that. Maybe it doesn't. It's hard. It's not hard. It's impossible to say. But I did at the time think that Badenoch was the genuine article. I did, and I wasn't concerned about having a black woman as prime minister. But like I say, I think that that moment is now past, and as the white majority in this country, we do need to assert a certain dominance over our own society. It's all this inclusivity for the sake of it just means we've begun to realise just means no diversity, just means no white people. So her time has passed, and yet there she is. Um, and so there's a lot of people getting very upset about this. I think it's a minor issue, really, because I still think that the Tories are toast. So it's an intellectual point. But all the race vultures on the left are doing what we all knew they would do, and we all knew that the Conservatives wouldn't escape the criticism of them. And it's come out immediately that from the hateful left that she's a race traitor, she's the black face of white supremacy, she's a coconut, all this shit from all of the usual suspects. And if the Conservative Party thought that by electing a black woman as leader would quell any of that criticism, they've been sorely mistaken, because it's ramped up almost immediately, and with no let up and no get out clause and no nuance that they're talking about a black woman now. I mean, basically, she is, if anything, being thought of as even worse than if they had elected a white man like Robert Jenrick. Not that they would have given him any pass, but so the Conservative Party are patting themselves on the back here, and they really didn't ought to be, because in a way they've fallen into a complete trap. Unless, of course, the trap it's not a trap, but it's all part of the narrative of it's a uniparty, and the Conservative Party are just one half of one cheek of the arse. But having said that her time has passed, there she is, and there is the possibility, of course, that she could be our next prime minister. Now, like I say, I thought that she was the genuine article. I didn't think that she was just a diversity hire. From the things that I've heard her say over the years, and I think I predicted 5 years ago that she would be prime minister, and I didn't think that was any bad thing, really, at that point in time. But I say again, things have changed rather a lot in the last 2 years. But the criticism from the left has been expected. What I didn't expect was the ferocity of the criticism from the, what you might call the new right, I suppose. You know, supposedly people generally on our side, and Sunak was insipid. He didn't go on about his Indian heritage at all, even though it was painful to see. And in that respect, that was quite a good thing. I mean, he made some references to it, but not much, not much. And interestingly, he wasn't criticised nearly as much by the left as Badenoch has been already, which is interesting in itself, and it kind of speaks to an idea that this sort of very divisive idea that black people are the most discriminated against in our society. This is bullshit, obviously, but and that Indians, who in some respects have assimilated better or more completely, they're not completely, but more so than black people. So they don't. The election of Kemi Badenoch as leader has elicited a far more vicious reaction from both the left, the race baiters on the left, and the kind of ethno-nationalists on the right. And you have to go quite deep into this sort of stuff, because it's for those of you with televisions. I understand that you don't get a television advert now without a mixed race couple in it, and as I understand it, the favoured mixed race couple is a black man and a white woman. Now, that could just be coincidental, but it probably isn't. Let's face it. It's all part of the rubbing the right's nose in it. And this is something I've always thought was kind of strange, in that if one thinks of an interracial couple, you tend to think of a black person and a white person. And more often than not, you tend to think of a black man and a white woman. But, that's not necessarily the case, but that probably is the normal impression you get. If you talk about an interracial couple, you don't normally think about a white man and an Indian woman, or a Pakistani man and a white woman. You don't normally tend to, and you definitely don't think of a Far Eastern person and a white person, a Chinese person or Chinese descent or anything. And this is something that Gerard Batten had when he was the leader of UKIP, that he had to contend with. Everybody was calling him racist because he used to listen to Tommy Robinson and stuff like that, and he would promote Tommy Robinson. And yet Gerard Batten was in an interracial marriage and had mixed race children. But people don't think of it like that, because it seems to be that the only real interracial couple is between a black person and a white person. An African descended person and a Caucasian descended person. Why we have to keep fucking talking about all this shit is really gets on my tits. And it really gets on my tits. But here we are. And so I was thinking of that. I mean, I don't get a lot of pushback on my channel. Most people, which is not necessarily a good thing, really, because I don't make too many enemies, which is not necessarily a good thing, because you need to have some pushback. and my channel is to some extent an echo chamber, but nevertheless, it doesn't mean that that's a bad thing necessarily, because I connect with people that I genuinely agree with, and then people who watch think, oh, there's somebody else thinks like me, and that's not necessarily a bad thing, particularly in all this, woke infested putrid sewer that is our modern society. So that's not a bad thing. But um, lately, I've been getting a few, they're not really, slightly snarky comments that I'm edging towards the woke stuff, or I can't remember the phrases they use, but it's there, and the criticism is that I shouldn't, basically, as far as I can tell, is the criticism I shouldn't be supporting any black people at all. That's the criticism as far as I can see it, and the criticism of Badenoch is basically that she is a black woman supposedly trying to become leader of a white country. Now, these sort of ethno-nationalist arguments are the sort of things I wouldn't even have given house room to, 5 years ago, even 5 years ago. And 5 years ago, I was one of the people who believed what they said about Tommy Robinson. You know, so I would have thought those people were, so, just put it somewhat ironically, beyond the pale. But now I believe you have to listen to all voices, even ones that you don't agree with. There are no people that should be out of the Overton window. There shouldn't be anybody out of the Overton window, even that's hardline racists or you know hardline anti-Semites or whatever it is. Um, because everybody's got their point. Everybody's got a point, and I understand. I understand this ethno-nationalist impulse. I do understand it. You know, and the longer the borders remain open, and the longer we are subjected and forced to live with hundreds of thousands of what you could quite reasonably call, maybe not hundreds of thousands, but certainly the undocumented ones that wash up on the beach. Some will be good people, but amongst them, there will be an awful lot of savages. People who don't know how to live in a society, in a civilized society. And in a way, it's not their fault. They've never lived in a civilized society. These are people who think it's perfectly normal to go out just before they go out the front door. They grab their 2 foot knife, their bloody machete, and that's what they go out with. And they think that's normal. And because they do that and they never get arrested, they continue to think it's normal. Um, and the way that these absolutely hateful Islamist types, the way they treat women and all that sort of stuff, these are people who are not products of a civilized society. And now there's so many of them. There are so many of them that the argument for an ethnocentric state gets stronger every day. And I understand that, and I do understand that, and my attitudes have hardened somewhat over the years as well. And because, and I've said this before, because I'm constantly looking for evidence that black people don't hate me. I do follow channels that push that idea. I did the interview with Momus, you know, a Kuwaiti-born Pakistani immigrant who loves this country, an ex-Muslim who loves this country and is doing everything he can to support it. And there's another um, um, Twitter account I follow um, called The Black Opinion. And I think it's not just one person, but the main character is a guy called Sarwar Garvey. Now, I started following him maybe 6 or 7 years ago, something like that. And he used to say some quite sensible things, but he also described himself as a black nationalist. And it wasn't clear exactly what he meant by that. And it didn't sound like that was um, something that was very conducive to a harmonious society in Britain, because he is British. Um, but one of the things he did is he interviewed Tommy Robinson, you know, 6 or 7 years ago. And he had him on and he let him speak his piece. And he asked him directly if he was a racist. And he listened to Tommy's response. And they had a decent conversation. And at the end, they shook hands and said, "Thank you very much." And so it suggested someone who had an open mind. So I thought this is a bloke worth listening to. And recently he's come up with. It seems like, I mean, I'd have to speak to him, and I might try and get in contact with him. It seems like he has a. Um, it seems like his attitudes have hardened as well, and he's a black man. He's a proper black man, a proper African-looking man who looks as if he has two African-looking parents. So he's proper black man. He's not just mixed race or whatever. Um, and he posted something the other day saying that he believes that white societies or any society must remain 95% homogenous. And I thought that's an interesting thing to say, because that means he remains in a small minority forever, if that's the case. And one of the things that I've always thought about all the race grifters and everything, talking about how terrible it is and how terrible it is to live in a racist white society and all the rest of it. And I thought that basically what they really mean is they don't like being in a minority. And certainly, with the amount of Muslims we've now got here, we know that they don't want to live in a minority. We know that they want to live in the majority and they want to take over. And we know that because they tell us that. And I thought there was an interesting thing for this guy to say, because you should look him up on Twitter. The Black Opinion, it's called. The Black Opinion. And it's interesting because one of my best friends told me a couple of years ago, who tends towards the ethnocentric view. That's almost exactly what he said to me, 2 or 3 years ago. And at the time I thought, I didn't think that was outrageous, but I thought it's not really realistic, But we have to make these things realistic. And so, the few people that have made, kind of asides to me being, too in love with the idea of the liberal multicultural society, which isn't true actually. I mean, it would be truer to say that I would support, a multiracial society, but only under those conditions that the majority, the ethnic majority, remain at around 95%, rather than 75% or whatever it is we've got now. And then you get, and so this criticism of her is coming from, people that I respect online, Pete North of Northern Variant. He just thinks she's a liberal, um, liberal multicultural part of the establishment. And maybe he's right, and maybe I will be proved wrong. But my instinct is that she is still the genuine article. Now, I will put a caveat in here: is that I still haven't forgiven her for voting for vaccine passports and pushing the vaccine on pregnant women. So I'm not giving her a free pass here at all. Um, but as we know, COVID never happened because obviously nobody wants to talk about it. So it's something that never happened. But nevertheless, I digress. Um, but the ethno-nationalists, and I understand their point of view, and I don't disagree with it, broadly. But there are people who deserve to be given the benefit of the doubt here. Momus is one. The black opinion is another. Um, and there is also something which is a very nuanced point here that I think needs to be explained because it's difficult to explain this. Sometimes it's difficult because it's all wrapped up in all these different identities and all the rest of it. But and why I don't really want to go down the ethno-nationalist track, or at least not go down it too far anyway. And I've got and I think there is quite obviously a place we don't want to go to. Um, but the nuanced point is this, and it would be nice if people were to sort of acknowledge this. And the nuanced point is some of these people are fucking friends of mine. They're fucking friends of mine. And I'm not going to fucking ditch them because some fucking wanker on the internet tells me that I can't be friends with black people. I'm not going to fucking do it. I'm not fucking doing it. Now, these people are friends of mine, some of them, and I have a relationship with them that I don't have with fucking wankers on the internet. So that's the nuanced point. And it didn't fucking have to be this way. It didn't have to be like this. Now, the ethno nationalists haven't caused this. They haven't caused this. And, the people like Steve Laws, for instance, who've gone down the ethno nationalist way and no black person can be British and all the rest of it, you know. And, Momus, for instance, says that he can't be English. He's not English. You know, he's a Kuwaiti born Pakistani, and he doesn't insist that he is English. But by his behaviour, he is doing far more for this country than most people are. Black or white. So he deserves to be given the benefit of the doubt. And I consider him to be a friend. I'm not a close friend to him. I'm sort of an internet friend, but I have met him a couple of times, and we're friendly, and I appreciate the things that he's doing. And there are other people that I know that nobody on the internet knows about that I want to remain friends with. Like I say, it didn't have to be like this. We were doing all right till like I say, it's not the ethno-nationalists have done. It's all the fucking race grifters, the Kehinde Andrewses and the Yasmin Alibi Browns and the Dr. Sholas. These hateful pieces of shit that have fucked everything up for everybody else. I mean, those are the people we need to get rid of. Those are the people that need to be fucking kicked out. You know, we were doing all right until then, and until Blair and the Labour machine decided to rub the right noses in it. We were doing all right until then. I mean, as you can probably tell, I'm a bit upset about this. Now, like I say, I do understand the ethno-nationalist arguments. I do understand it, and it has validity, and it needs to be listened to. The arguments need to be listened to. But I don't really want to live in that kind of society. I mean, I don't want to live in the kind of society we're getting anyway. So I'm not saying I want to live in that kind of society either. You know, and I do understand that what what many don't understand, and the this idea that you're most perfectly illustrated by Richard Tice the other day when he just dismissed all the Tommy Robinson supporters, all that lot he called them, just dismissed them. But that's their core support. I mean, that was a particularly moronic thing to him to say, But and there are, we are as the sort of freedom movement or the you know what you might want to call it. We are sort of experts in managing to fuck ourselves over. I'm not saying that we should give a pass to bad behaviour on our side, but this idea that Tommy Robinson, I used to think he was a terrible person, and now I don't. Now I think he's a tremendously admirable person who sometimes he lies, it appears, and sometimes he says things that aren't true in order to advance a certain agenda or whatever it is. He's not a fucking angel, you know. But I don't think he lies nearly as much as most of the establishment lie, you know. And so you've got people gleefully throwing him under the bus, and then you get people like Lawrence Fox, who's a bit of a gobshite and he's a bit of a loudmouth, but his heart's in the right place, and he has completely lost his entire career for speaking up when he could have just kept his gob shut. And then there's Farage. Farage doesn't back his own side up when he needs to, and he's backed off from mass deportations, and but he is a politician, and he's got to tread a line. GB News the same. They do, they do a lot of good stuff, and then they don't stand up when they're supposed to. And then there's Richard Tice in in Reform, who basically dropped candidates on the say so of hope not hate. I mean, you know, does it mean Richard Tice is a terrible person? No. It means that sometimes he's weak and sometimes he makes poor decisions, and perhaps in some ways he's not somebody to admire, perhaps. But we have these. Everything gets splintered. You get a coalition forming of people who generally think the same thing, and they're all fucking sniping at each other. You know, um, and just as an example, you'll have to look this up, Guy's political channel or Guy's channel, whatever it is. And he's done some very, very good work on exposing lies of all sorts of people. And now he's gone after Tommy. He's gone after Tommy in a big way. And he's saying that Tommy's in jail because of his own fault and because he lied about this. And he he's basically saying Tommy's in jail because of his own, I don't know, his own belief that his lies wouldn't get found out or whatever it was. And he's only got himself to blame. Now, probably that's true. He's another person who's not fucking perfect. But we are fucking trying to win here. We are trying to win. I'm not saying the lies are okay. I'm not saying that. But I'm saying that we're not in a position to be whiter than white here. They're beating us at our own game. They're using our democracy against us. They're using our principles against us. One such example is the principle of birthright, something that I used to believe in as 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 a principle because it's clear and it was precise, and you can say he's born here, he isn't. He gets the right because he's born here, and he doesn't. Even though the person who is born here is critical of everything about society and seems to hate us and all the rest of it, he still has a right to be here because he was born here. But I've had to change my opinion on that because we know that that is being used against us. They just get these people over here, they breed like flies, and then they say, well, he's British born, isn't he? He's British, isn't he? And then he goes out and says death to Palestine. I mean, so that's a principle that I've had to sort of abandon, really, because I hate to abandon it because I hate to compromise my principles. I hate to do it. But by not compromising my principles, it means I'm going to get defeated. And we have to understand quite viscerally that we are at war here. We have to understand that. And I mean that in a very real sense. I don't mean culture war, blah, 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 as an analogy, as a struggle, a battle. It is actually a war. And what I mean by that is that when two armies go against each other, they use every advantage they have to beat the other side. They don't go into the battle and say, "Well, what's the moral way to fight this battle?" It's not the moral way to fight this battle. Um, they do what they can to win. Now, the communist left are using every tool in the book to beat us, and that was completely evident in the summer disturbances, the summer riots. They knew that those people who were complaining about the immigration were their enemy. They knew that. They knew that they were their enemy. And so they weaponized the justice system to get them put in jail. There was no due process. There was no rule of law. The Muslims who beat up the coppers in Manchester Airport, they still haven't been charged. I mean, that Labour that Labour councillor Ricky Jones said we've got to slit people's throats. Yeah, he's been bailed. He's been bailed, and his trial's not to next year or something. So he's back at home, in front of the fire, with his feet up. Whereas, many people are, that poor woman's now is like nearly 3 years in jail for saying she doesn't care if somebody sets fire to the migrant hotel. You don't have to care. I mean, that's not incitement. They said it was incitement, but it's not excitement. It's not incitement. All she said was, "I don't care." And then there's Peter Lynch, sentenced to 2 years, 8 months. In 5 minutes. Just and obviously there he was, just a normal person with concerns about his country and what's happening to it, and thought he lived in a democracy, thought he lived in a free society where people have the right to protest. And before his feet touched the ground, he was inside, in jail, with a load of hardened criminals and vengeful Islamists. And he couldn't take 2 years and 8 months of that. And I completely understand. And now he's dead. But we have to understand that we are in a warlike situation. The only reason it doesn't seem more like a war is because we're not armed, and just generally speaking, in an everyday sense, neither is the state, because they don't have to be. They think they don't have to be. But they will use every advantage they have. And now, as they're now in government, they have a load of advantages. And they've already turned the justice system against us, which is part of they've weaponized that. It's not a justice system. There's no rule of law. There's no due process. It's just the exercise of raw power. Raw power that they've got and we haven't. Just as a sort of analogy here, and I'm not taking sides in the Israel-Palestine thing. Really, I'm really not. I don't have a dog in this fight, except to say that I have still yet to hear a Palestinian argument that I agree with. But that aside, and I'd be interested if any of you got any arguments that can change my mind on it. But anyway, when the Israelis went into Gaza and they cut the power and they cut the water and they did all these things, in a war situation, that's what you do. You make it difficult for the other side to fight back. One way of doing that is by killing them. Another way of doing that is to cut off the water supply and cut off the food supply, cut off the electricity. Now, that's being called a war crime by many people. But when the Japanese attacked Singapore in 1941, the Japanese came down the Malayan Peninsula on their bicycles mostly. They were clever. The British didn't think they'd be able to get through that impenetrable jungle, but they did. And when they got down to Singapore's an island, and the reservoirs were on the mainland. And what the Japanese did is they come along and they captured the mainland, and then they turned the taps off. So Singapore was deprived of water, and so they had to defend it. They had to surrender. But that's what you do in war. Was that a war crime? Was that a war crime? I mean, our understanding what a war crime is has changed over time. The things what we did in the Second World War, we would be considered war crimes today. Carpet bombing German cities is now would fall within that now, but it wasn't considered a war crime at the time. So the point is that when you're in a war situation, you will use every tool you have, every weapon you have to win. And the establishment, now it's in the dominant position, as it has been for some time, um, because it was no different when the Tories were in. Um, but it was a little different, obviously. But they're not concerned about what's right or moral. They just want to win, and they've got enormous power on their side. And there's only one thing that they don't have on their side that we do, and it's only one thing, and it's the only thing that's going to make any difference. Is they don't have the numbers. Their election victory was, it's a mile wide, but their support is a mile wide, but an inch thick, if that. And they're basically they're they're accelerating their destruction of this country using every tool they have. You know, and we have to stop behaving in this way that we must go with their plan. We don't have to obey them. This is not about legality or illegality or anything. And obviously, I'm not encouraging anyone to do anything illegal. But there's 70 million of us, and there's probably 55 million of us who still want to keep control of our own country and don't want to turn it into an Islamic caliphate or anything like that. But but for the moment, there's 70 million of us. There's 130,000 police in the entire country. They're outnumbered over 500 to 1 by us. We don't have to obey them. We don't have to go along with this. I saw a post just yesterday saying about how the farmers are getting fucked over. And it was one of those sort of defeatist posts that once the countryside's gone, it's gone forever, and they'll plaster it in solar panels, and we'll all be eating insects and all the rest of it. We don't have to do this. It's a serf mindset. They're still playing on the fact that we're civilized people who live in a so-called democracy. But we don't live in a democracy. We live in a place where we have an extremely powerful establishment, and with every passing day, they're taking more power away from the people every single day. And they've been doing that for 30 years, and they've been doing it for 30 years, and they're really accelerating it now. But they can only do this to us if we agree to it. And they're still banking on the fact that we will obey the law and we will respect the law. They're still banking on that. But law is a proxy. We got the way you build a civilized society is you build in a set of rules so there isn't complete anarchy all the time. And so long as that so long as that civilization is being governed properly, 130,000 people to enforce the laws on 70 million is sufficient. It's absolutely sufficient because there's an agreement that we're all going to obey the law. We're going to obey the rules. Now, if the establishment breaks those rules and breaks that, because that's a contract, that's a social contract. If they break that social contract, we're under no obligation to play by their rules. We're under no obligation at all. And I wish people would begin to understand this. And now you get this situation, don't you, where people, this thing that's another thing that's been imported from America, this infection from America, where people just go into shops and just fucking take stuff. They just fucking take it and walk out. And they know that there's nobody's going to do anything. And that's how you change a high trust society into a low trust society. That's how you do it, you know. And 130,000 police to enforce the law in a high trust society is sufficient. 130,000 police to enforce the law of enforce to police a population of 70 million in a low trust society is nowhere near enough. In that situation, you need to have 5-10 million law enforcement over the rest of the people, and have them heavily armed and all the rest of it. In a low trust society. In East Germany, I mean, I think it was something like, I don't know, I think it was something like about 1 in 12 people were at least occasional informants for the regime, something like that. So 1 in 12, so what's that? It's about 8 million people in it, something like that. That's what happens when you have a low trust society. I mean, on top of the just general unpleasantness of never knowing who you can trust and looking over your shoulder all the time. In East Germany, you had husbands, informing on wives, daughters informing on their fathers. Not to mention, colleagues and stuff like that. Disgusting. A horrible, 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 spirit crushing, dehumanizing society. That's what a low trust society is, and having a high trust society is a delicate thing. And it develops organically from people just being decent to each other. And if you start importing millions of people from completely failed states, people who may very well be people that they've just emptied all their prisons out of. There's probably, I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if there's a situation where they say, well, look, this little poor tin pot country that's got 5,000 prisoners, and they don't really have the resources to look after them. They might very well say, well, you can, we'll release you, but you've got to fuck off. Right? There's a ticket to England. Off you go. But we have to get away from this serf mindset. The social contract has been broken. It's broken. They've broken their side of the bargain. And they're still expecting us to obey their rules. We don't have to. We just don't have to. In essence, the police are an irrelevance. The Muslims treat the police as an irrelevance. So we should. Even the traveller community in Hare Hills, in Leeds, it can't be a very big community, a couple of thousand people. They just ignored the police. It's ignored them. and then set their police cars on fire and chase them down the street. That's just one small community. I mean, the sad thing is that most of Europe now is turning right, and the Dutch and the Swedes have really clamped down hard on immigration, sort of, and it can be done. They will say, "Well, it can't be done. It can't be done." Can't be. Pakistan just expelled 1.7 million Afghans. It can be done. They tell us it can't be done. It can be done. You just have to want it to be done. And the trouble is, we've now got a regime who absolutely do not want it to be done. They're on an absolute turbocharged mission to destroy everything in short order. That's why Bill Gates was in Downing Street the other day, you know, a few weeks ago. You know, where's the minutes of that meeting? What were they? What did they talk about? Did they talk about perhaps buying up farmland? Did they? Apparently, we can't get the minutes. We don't know what was said. We're not allowed to know that. And yet, if you drive down the road, automatic number plate camera knows that you've gone to the shop. So they know that about us. But when the Prime Minister is having a conversation with a very, very dodgy foreign billionaire, we're not allowed to know what they talked about. The surveillance only goes one way. I was thinking that it might be quite an idea to arrange a rally and get everybody to register to come to a rally, and to make sure we can get 130,000 people to come to the rally. That's as many as there are policemen in the whole country. And then the following month, we do the same thing again, but it's 260,000. And the following month, you do it again, 520,000. Just to press home to the establishment that in the end, there's nothing they can do. If we decide to rebel against them, there is nothing that they can do. But it would have to be a thing where you have to you'd have to register to go, so they know how many people are going, so they know. So there's no, and people have to be committed to go. They have to be, and they have to sort of commit themselves that they are going to go, and at the end, in the final analysis, I couldn't be bothered. I had a bad leg, whatever it was. I couldn't get time off work. All this sort of stuff. If you could do it, and you publicise it as, we're going to have as many people up there as you've got policemen in the whole country. Make it plain. We'll make it plain to them. You're not in charge of us. We're in charge of you. So what do you think? I think it's a good way of us to commit to staying free. Anyway, have a think. See what you think.